Well, hey everybody, Andy Kvernen here with another Cornerstone Connection Daily Devotional. I want us this morning to talk about relationships. Relationships are one of those things that can be really amazing, and we're created for relationships. We just talked about what it means to love one another and wash each other's feet like Jesus did his disciples there in the upper room. We talked about that this last week at Cornerstone. But the reality is that relationships can be kind of tricky, and there's this dynamic in relationships that we often refer to these days as codependency. And codependency is this notion that a person becomes codependent on another for their own happiness. They act towards another in a way that expects to gain reciprocally from that relationship. In other words, if I'm codependent with another person, I'm maybe serving them, I'm doing extra chores around the house, I'm at work, making sure I go out of my way and that they notice so that they affirm me, so that I can become happy, so that I can have a sense of identity and purpose in their response to me. And you can see how that can become a little bit dangerous. And that's a reality, not just in regular everyday relationships, but also in ministry. For those of us who are ministering to our kids as parents, for those of us who are coaches, leading our teams, for those of us that are teachers in the classroom, for those of us in the church who are leading and who are teaching the Word of God, it's easy, if we're not careful, to slip into carrying out our responsibilities such that we can be affirmed by those whom we're supposedly serving. And the Apostle Paul was aware of this dynamic. And there's this really fascinating passage in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 where Paul, aware of the potential for these kind of dynamics to take place, is addressing this with the Thessalonian church. And I want to read to you several verses starting at the beginning of chapter 2 in the book of 1 Thessalonians. Paul says, "For you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you is not in vain. For though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict." Now, Paul had been in Philippi, and he had experienced suffering. The Philippian government had opposed Paul. They'd beaten him inappropriately, even as a Roman citizen, and he left there wounded, no doubt. Now, he had a great relationship with the Philippian church. In Acts 16, Lydia was the first believer in Macedonia, and she and her household were baptized. It was amazing, and eventually Paul had a great relationship with that church, and yet he had some wounds from Philippi, and it strikes me that often our codependency comes out of our woundedness. A lot of times people that maybe grew up in alcoholic homes, grew up in abusive situations, grew up in situations where affection was withheld from them, they can become codependent on other people. They can grow to really ask for affirmation from their environment, from their relationships. I think Paul's aware of this. And so he says this in verse 3. He says, "For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive, but just as we've been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God who tests our hearts." Paul's saying here, look, you know that we suffered. You know that it was a struggle for us, but I'm telling you, our ministry, our appeal to you, Thessalonian church, is not from error. It's a true ministry. We're here with pure motives, not from impurity. We're not here to deceive, but we're here to tell you the truth. And with that, we understand that you may not always like what we have to say. In fact, you may not affirm us by what we say, and yet here's what's important. Just as we've been approved by God, verse 4, to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God, who tests our hearts. See, Paul is aware of the propensity for codependency, I think, in his relationship with the Thessalonian church and even with others. This kind of dynamic shows up in some of his other letters. But Paul's saying, look, my goal here is not to please you. And we'll see, it doesn't mean that he doesn't love them, doesn't mean that he's not affectionate toward them, but he says his goal is not to please them. He says, verse 4, "Just as we've been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God." Why? Because it's God who tests our hearts. It's God to whom we're ultimately accountable. But now, notice this. We're going to go on to verse 5. See, Paul says, here's what we didn't do. He says, verse 5, "For we never came with words of flattery, as you know, nor with a pretext for greed. God is witness." We didn't come to butter you up. We didn't come to make you something that you're not. We didn't come to try to butter you up so that you would butter us up, so that you would affirm us. No, and we didn't come here to get something from you. We're not looking for you to provide anything for us. We didn't come with a pretext of greed, he said. Nor did we seek glory from people, whether from you or from others, though we could have made demands as apostles of Christ. We have authority. We have the right to ask things from you based on our standing with God and what he's doing through us in the church, but that's not what we did. He says, but we were gentle among you. I love this. He says, well, we were gentle among you. Look at the imagery now that he goes to. Like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. What do we know that's true about a nursing mother? A nursing mother doesn't get a lot back from her child, does she? That child, especially when it's first born, before it can smile, before it can coo, before any of these things, all it does is it sleeps and it eats and it puts it back out again, right? Those children don't give anything back. And Paul's saying, look, like a nursing mother gives to her children, so we came to you. We weren't expecting anything back from you. And yet, verse 8, being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also of our own selves, because you'd become very dear to us. What else is true about a nursing mother? She loves her child. There's a deep and affectionate bond there. And so, friends, the presence of the potential for codependency doesn't mean that we should avoid relationships. It doesn't mean we should avoid giving to another. What Paul's setting up here is this reality that he's not giving to the Thessalonian church so that they build him up, so that they affirm him. He's giving to them out of his love for God and out of his affection for them, expecting nothing in return. Friends, I'm challenged by that. I want to be the kind of pastor. I want to be the kind of Christ follower, pastor or not. I want to be the kind of husband, the kind of father, the kind of neighbor that's willing to give no matter what, like an affectionate nursing mother, not like one who has a pretext for greed or glory. And so that challenges me. Perhaps that challenges you today. What does it look like to love like Paul, to show affection to others like Paul, expecting nothing in return? Friends, I'm convinced that's the way of Jesus. That's what it means to wash each other's feet. That's what it means to love in the way that God has designed us to love. And when that happens, that's revolutionary and the world gets changed. Let's love like Jesus today. God bless you, friends. Have a great day. And Lord willing, we'll see you again soon in the Cornerstone Connection Daily Devotional.